From the campus of Stanford University.
People are worried about data. They're worried about their privacy and their security. They should be. We need secure systems.
This is the future of everything.
But we can't have a system that closes that data off. It is too rich of a source of inspiration, innovation, and discovery for new things in medicine.
With your host, Russ Altman.
Today on The Future of Everything, the future of jobs. So, we all have to figure out how to eat and keep a roof over our head. And that's at least one of the main reasons why we need to have jobs. And we need to make some money and eat and keep roof over our head. And the issues of deciding what we're going to do and how we're going to do it is complicated. And it has to do with what our talents and our interests are, the amount of time we want to spend at our job versus the amount of time we want to spend doing other things. That leads into issues of flexibility. Do I want a flexible job? Is that flexibility not important to me because I love what I do so much that I'll do it 24/7? How much money do I want to make? Is money important to me? Is it very important to me? Do I want to have a lot of it? Do I just want to have enough to live? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to live? How much do I want to commute? What kind of commute do I want to have? Should it be on my bicycle, on a plane, in a car? Then if you're a company and you're deciding to hire people, it's just as complicated. And in fact, it's exactly the same issues. What kind of talents do I need on my team? What kind of time do I want them to spend? How much flexibility does my business have for allowing the employees to work at home, to work at the workplace, to travel? How much can I pay my employees? How should I incentivize their work? By paying them upfront? Should I have bonus structures? Should I give them options? If it's a company that has stocks, should I give them options? Should I give them stocks? Where's my company going to be located? Headquarters, all these issues. And these interests of the employers and the employees are sometimes perfectly aligned, but sometimes not. And economics seems to be evolving. So the standard image in the 50s and 60s, and I know at least a few people, mostly like fathers-in-laws and uncles, and who actually lived a life where they worked at a single company for 35 years. They had a single location where they drove to work. They got some stock from that company. They made a salary. They got a gold watch and retired. And now, here in 2018, that model is much less common. We have the gig economy, or the 1099 economy, where independent contractors make a living by assembling together lots of different jobs, gigs, and you can imagine differences in flexibility, differences in stability, etc. Now, you can try to understand all of this with theory, or you can dive in and try to see how actual people are making actual decisions, and you can get them to explain their decisions and understand what they do. And of course, the ability to track data these days enables new ways to understand jobs in economics. Paul Oyer is a professor of business and a senior fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, and is known for studying these real-world economic situations in order to elucidate principles. He became, for example, an Uber driver to understand the gig economy. He looked at small business owners for novel practices, incentives, and marketing, and he studied parking space allocations at universities. And he studied online dating to understand what it means for economics. Paul, there is so much to talk about here. Thanks for being here, but let's start with online dating. I know you talk a lot about Uber, but I was just drawn to online dating, which, by the way, I've never done. But I loved the idea that online dating would be a source of information about economics, because that's the one place you would have thought, I just want to fall in love. I just want to find my mate. So tell me, how did you learn about economics? Why did that even pop into your head?
Right. So I'm a labor economist by training. I study how firms match to workers. And it's 8 years ago now, I found myself back on the dating market for the first time in decades. And it very quickly became clear to me that dating in the interim, two things had happened in the interim while I was out of the dating market. One was the rise of the internet, which led to the availability of online dating. And the other was I'd become an economist. So I saw the world very differently than I'd seen it when I was last on the dating market. Well, once you start online dating, you realize it's just all economics. It's the same as the job market. So they're very similar. You have in both cases, you have two sides that are looking for something specific, and both sides are differentiated. So it's not like buying and selling the mug that's sitting in front of us, because there are many mugs that look just like that. No two people in the labor market look the same. No two people in the dating market look the same. And so having studied the labor market, the parallels to the online dating world were just dramatic. And the reason I I wrote a book about this, and the reason I focused the book around that was I wanted to teach people economics in an area that would be interesting to them, and I thought online dating would fit there.
Yes.
And the second thing is, what's great about online dating is no money changes hands. I mean, to a first approximation, no money changes hands. And people think economics is the study of money, but of course, actually, economists don't care at all about money. We care about utility and other things like that. And money is just a means of exchanging to keep the markets working well. But money in and of itself is uninteresting.
The exchanges are quite different in online marketing, but still exchanges.
There are still exchanges. And there's what's nice about online dating. And again, it's very similar to the job market. You have all these problems with private information. People have incentives to hide information until a certain point. We have models of what are called cheap talk, where people will lie very strategically. So they won't just lie because they're bad people. They'll lie strategically. And then, so there are limits, of course. So you pointed this out. The book I wrote was called Everything I Ever Needed to Know About Economics I Learned from Online Dating. I couldn't write a book called Everything I Ever Needed to Know About Online Dating I Learned from Economics.
And I wanted to ask you about that symmetry. Can you as an economist, could you come in and do an extra good job on the online dating scene?
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk about an economist and not yourself.
Well, I mean, it did. So, I mean, I don't know if it's because I'm an economist. I found somebody, I got remarried and I love my wife, and I found her through online dating. So,
okay,
yes,
that's a huge win.
I was very successful, and that's been wonderful for me. But I don't know that that's because I'm an economist. I think I saw it differently and I analyzed it differently. I don't think I necessarily had strategies that were so much better than any. This is the thing. Most people are pretty good armchair economists because they've just learned how to navigate their lives. And after a while online dating, they learn how to do it in a good way.
Yes.
And so, yeah, sure, I can analyze it and say, oh, that's the Spence signaling model. But other people are implementing those models in their everyday life, and we count on that. If people weren't pretty good at figuring this stuff out, economics wouldn't be nearly the interesting social science that it is.
It also suggests, so I've become aware mostly from talking to my students, that LinkedIn has become a very important piece of infrastructure for job finding, and that I even had my 20-something-year-old children tell me that your CV, so to speak, your resume on LinkedIn is probably more important than the printed version these days. Mm-hmm. So that makes it seem to me like the LinkedIn ecosphere and the online dating must be extremely parallel, and they must be looking at each other and using many of the same techniques and basically generating the same best practices in many ways. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, that's a really interesting point, because I think that's back when I was working on this, the parallels between the job market and the labor market were a little tighter than they are. LinkedIn, I think, has drawn a divide between them as follows. The parallel between the dating market and the job market online would be careerbuilder.com, Indeed.com, some of these other places where you put up your resume and folks and jobs are posted and you're matched that way. LinkedIn's changed the dynamic a little bit, because LinkedIn has put up this, as your children mentioned, your resume there is very important. Why is it important? Because people go on LinkedIn and they say, hey, I'm looking for somebody, and they don't wait for you to apply.
Right.
They just start saying, hey, are you interested in this job? In the dating context, that's not how we do things, right? We're not all going, there may be people out there who do this, but for the most part, we don't go start sending messages on dating sites when we're already married and say, hey, would you like to leave that person and come over to me? So the parallel breaks down a little once you add LinkedIn, which is I agree, completely important part of what the labor market is nowadays.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman, and I'm speaking with Paul Oyer about jobs and dating, all kinds of good things. And switching from the online dating, LinkedIn, the other thing that I definitely wanted to talk about is this idea of real world economics by just jumping in and going into these micro environments, as opposed to, the other model of economics would be you sit around with a lot of mathematical equations trying to summarize human behavior with these laws. So you took a gig, so to speak, as an Uber driver.
Right.
Was it a similar thing? Was this motivated by the realization that you could learn some new economic principles? Tell me why you did that and what did you learn?
Well, so first of all, these aren't substitutes for one another. The paper ends up having all the math and statistics required to try to impress your colleagues in economics.
Of course.
But the reason I ended up doing the Uber driving is, and I would have done this in a lot of other markets, and when I study them as a labor economist, is you want to understand the motivation so that you can design the proper experiments and other things. So we're hoping to do more at Uber that we haven't done yet, where we might try different experiments in the Uber context to see if we can increase the efficiency of for drivers and consumers. So in order to understand how drivers might react to things, I thought, gee, it would be interesting to know what it's like to be an Uber driver. Well, I wrote a series of papers about lawyers. Would have been great to
go to law school.
But that's the barriers to entry to trying that out for a few days are pretty high.
Right.
So for better or worse,
a number of movies come to mind from the 80s and 90s.
Exactly. So the barriers to entry to trying Uber driving, for better or worse, are pretty low. I mean, I went and it took me a couple of hours to go have my car maybe not even, to have my car inspected and fill out some paperwork. And then, at the end of this, they said, okay, you're ready. You can go on the road. I was like, really? I can start driving people? It's a little bit nerve-wracking that you can suddenly start driving people around. So that's why I did it. I thought we'd learn something. So I did. It turned out to be useful, not yet in exactly the way I'd planned, but in that we did this study of Uber drivers, and there have just been countless times where we'll be sitting around speculating about some of the findings, and I'll be like, oh, yes, definitely that hits home. I know about
so when you look at
that.
when you look at the Uber data and there are vexing behaviors in the data, you now have an ability to say, you know what, I know exactly what those folks are thinking. And I know that in your writing you've talked about these phenomena like, which drives many of us crazy, like canceling rides.
Yeah.
I've had an Uber driver drive right past me as if he was looking at me and what I had in my hand and decided whatever he saw he didn't like, and I saw him drive by me and say no. And of course, I was well aware that there was some higher level dynamic going on that made him say, this is not going to be good for me, and I don't know what it was. And it doesn't happen that much, otherwise I would never use the service. So that this gives you this insight to kind of come up with theories.
Exactly. So, I mean, a very simple example would be one of the big findings of our paper is that if you drive on Uber, you make more money after you've been driving for, I don't know, a few hundred rides or something. And a lot of people are like, what? Why would...
Right.
Well, I can tell you from driving, you just get a lot better at it. I mean, little things like finding the person on the street. The people who drove by you might have just been clueless because they hadn't sort of figured it out yet. Other things like I once picked someone up at a 49ers game. And the first time I did it just took forever to find the person. And then before I did it the second time, I went online, and then Uber has these little instructions that take 30 seconds that say, during the game, here's the best way to go. And sure enough, the next time I went to pick someone up at a 49ers game, I made like $100 in 1 hour with no trouble.
Okay, so many questions. Let's just go through them. First of all, did Uber know what you were doing?
Yeah.
Did they care? And B, did you tell folks?
Uber will take a driver wherever they could get them right now.
So professors of economics, no problem. Welcome aboard.
I'm not by the way, there's a guy at MIT who also does this. And I like to tease him because I have a much higher rating than he does.
So may I ask what your rating is?
4.97.
That's okay.
Yeah, that guy who gave me 4 stars, I want to know who he is. I'm very upset about it.
So what was Uber's response to finding out that you were doing this? Like, oh, cool, let us know, or we just don't care?
Oh, yeah, no, they were perfectly happy. I mean, I'm working with people at Uber as part of this project we're doing, and they were very curious about it. There's a guy there who, whenever he introduces me, always says, I'm working with Paul Oyer, who is an economist at Stanford, and of course, one of our driver partners, as they call them.
Driver partner. And the other question I want to ask is, what do the the guests, the customers in the car think when they find out that you might not fit their assumptions about an Uber driver?
Right. So I never tell them I never tell them I'm a Stanford professor.
Never.
I don't. No. I wouldn't lie, but I certainly don't volunteer that.
So I love talking to Uber drivers, and I always say, are you full-time or part-time? So
Right.
you would probably say you were a part-time.
Yeah, no, I'll answer all your questions honestly, and then if you say what I do for a living, I'll say I teach or something like
Gotcha.
that.
Gotcha.
And I did once ask a guy who I had learned had recently graduated from the business school at Haas, who he had for his microeconomics class, which threw him off a little bit, but.
And it wasn't you.
No, I teach at Stanford. Haas is the Berkeley Business School.
Berkeley Business School, yes.
But I know the economist there. So
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Paul Oyer about Uber driving and how it can teach you economics. So one of the things in some of your work that I took a look at is, and I gather this myself from speaking to Uber drivers, they are, generally, they're very smart and they respond to incentive structures and extremely complex situations. They can decompose into what does it mean for me to optimize my rewards.
Yeah.
And I've been really impressed because they can explain to me that the number of rides, and the guy yesterday was telling me, 30 short rides is a little bit of a pain, but actually there are some circumstances when this can be very valuable. Tell me some of the ways that those kinds of things turn into mathematical models of economics that you and your colleagues might get excited about.
Right. So definitely those types of things really matter to Uber. They're constantly rethinking how do they want to set up their compensation structure to drive, because they want those behaviors you were talking about, those incentives for 30 short rides or whatever. They want people to want to do what's in their interests as well as the drivers. They basically want to set things up so that their interests and the drivers are aligned.
Yes.
That's obviously that's better for everybody. And so they are constantly rethinking that sort of thing. So for example, the surge pricing is an obvious thing where they're setting things up so that people are incentivized to go do the right thing. But another thing, there are some things that they also want to incentivize around. So the 30 short rides, why are they going to incentivize around that? Well, one thing is they probably want to keep people from dual apping. I don't know. This I've not actually heard directly from Uber.
Dual apping. That sounds like a real technical. Is that Lyft and Uber?
Yeah, so as you probably know from your own experiences, many of the local drivers drive for both now. And certainly both sides, Lyft and Uber, would love to have more exclusivity around their drivers because this is leading to competition. I mean, Uber, for all of its success, and it's had great success, is still just losing money hand over fist because of their knockdown, drag-out fights with Lyft more than anything else.
It's the competition.
Yes, competition is brutal. It's good for we economists, though. We love competition.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. More with Paul Oyer about economics and what you can learn in the real world next on SiriusXM Insight 121.
From the campus of Stanford University.
People are worried about data. They're worried about their privacy and their security. They should be. We need secure systems.
This is the future of everything.
But we can't have a system that closes that data off. It is too rich of a source of inspiration, innovation, and discovery for new things in medicine.
With your host, Russ Altman.
Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Paul Oyer about the workplace, pay, incentives. And we were just having a great conversation about Uber and the way that the Uber drivers are really exquisitely sensitive to incentives and how Uber can use that to kind of align interests and optimize their products. And I know that you've made a study more generally of pay and incentives. And one of the things that comes up is the choices of how to pay an employee. And you can have salary, you can give stock options, you can give bonuses. How do companies think about that? And how good are they at matching the desired impact on the employee with the tools that they use to try to get that behavior?
Yeah, not great, but but pretty good. So it's hard to say exactly how good because it's hard to say what the standard should be. The problem, what makes it very hard is people's preferences tend to be more spread out and heterogeneous, to use an overused economics term, probably not overused anywhere else. Preferences
diverse preferences.
There you go. Thank you. Diverse preferences, but it's hard to make your compensation plans as diverse as the preferences of your employees. So And, of course, in any given organization, you'll have people who are really good, people who are not as good, and it's hard to separate the compensation as much as you want to for those people. So in startups, it's easier. The bigger your company gets, the harder these challenges are. But on the other hand, the more you can afford HR professionals who, despite all the negative connotations HR professional, having a lot of HR professionals around they do bring a certain professionalization and standardization to things that can be very valuable. So I did a series of studies on why firms give stock options to employees and also sort of thought a lot about when you would give somebody bonuses. And of course, those things can be very useful for incentive purposes, but why are they better than just paying somebody's salary? Well, they have a feature that other things don't have, which is you can make them go away more easily. So this standard economic theory doesn't like this very much, but it's a pretty well-known fact that people don't like having their base pay or their base salaries lowered. This is a real demotivator.
Right. That's a big one.
And somehow it's not the same as getting if you get a bonus on a regular basis, but one year you don't get it, that doesn't have the same negative connotation.
Right.
And so as a result, firms put a lot of variable pay out there, both as an incentive mechanism, but also as a means of being able to take your pay down. So stock options are a good example actually here, where you see stock options, you're like, oh, skin in the game, and everybody's interests are aligned.
That would be the guess is why they're doing it.
But then you look at a lot of companies that do it, and they have 10,000 employees. So you don't have to be a master mathematician to quickly realize that if somebody does a bang-up job, they're going to get back on their stock options, who's not the CEO. They're going to get back on their stock options like a dime, right? Because they own 1/1000th of 1% of the company.
Right, so it more would make you root for the company, but the fact that if you put in an extra hour every week or work harder, the impact, again, except for the CEO and very high-level people, the impact on the company's bottom line can't be that great.
It can't be that great.
So it's almost an irrational.
It's not. It doesn't have to be irrational. So I've tried. So my theory behind a lot of this is that it has more to do with sort of the sorting and the retention of people. So it's a means of getting people to say, "Hey, I really believe in this company. I'm willing to put some money on the line," and that tells you that they're probably a good fit for the company. And then on the other end, it also has this nice benefit that when your stock price goes up, and there's a lot of the value of stock options that I have goes up. That retains me very nicely.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, when the company's not doing well and its stock price goes down, I don't have to lay people off. I don't have to try to go lower their pay or something like that. That just their pay naturally goes down because the value of their stock options goes down.
So for someone who's listening who might have one advice, it sounds like these salary would be good. Like if you could have a choice between a raise and a bonus, the advice I've gotten is always take the raise because then it's compounded. There is, in many settings, there is not a great history of lowering salary, right or wrong.
Right.
And so it's kind of money in the bank not only today but in the future. And that sounds like it's still
my investment
true.
My investment banker friends say cash is king, and they're right. They're right. I mean, you're right. Money in the bank is people are risk averse.
Right.
And salaries are the least risky thing. They're not zero risk, of course. You can lose your job. The company can make some claim, we have to lower everybody's pay. But everything else equals, sure. I mean, when I get a raise, probably not everybody thinks of it this way, but when I get a raise, I might analyze things a little more than your average
You probably
person.
do, being an Uber driver.
But like when I get a raise every year, and it's a pretty predictable raise here at Stanford, as you know yourself.
Yes.
But if it's a little bit off in one direction or the other, I realize, like you said, with compounding, that has really long-term ramifications for me.
Yes,
right?
and especially the raises I got 25 years ago, which if I could go back in time, those are the ones I would argue about, not this year's.
That's very good. Yes, absolutely right.
So this is advice for my 20-somethings.
Exactly.
Okay, so an exciting thing that you have done, and there's a great story about being at a conference and going out on a road trip and actually playing hooky from the conference, and then meeting people, and this led to a series of meetings, actually, it sounds like, where you got little kind of microeconomic great stories. And can you tell us, like, what's the genesis of that, and what are the kinds of things you saw and learned, and how does it turn into principles?
Right. So just like I said before about Uber drivers and others, people are really good at figuring out how to optimize things. And we wanted to see that at the business level. So I'm a labor economist by training, but a lot of my teaching is in strategy, both sort of thinking about your market and thinking about your labor market, but also. So two other professors that I used to work with when I was at the Kellogg School and we would play hooky at these conferences and we'd go. Anyway, we all liked doing road trips. We all liked talking to businesses. And then, to be honest, by coincidence, we all get divorced at the same time. So we had some free time on our hands.
Thus the online dating.
Yes, exactly. Although that was unrelated to this project. So we started driving around talking to small business people. We ended up writing a book, a book called The Roadside MBA, which is meant to be a strategy book for small business people. And the idea is to take the frameworks we teach in our MBA classrooms and provide those to small business owners who don't have the time to go get an MBA. And even if they did, the case studies on Facebook and whatnot.
Yeah, they need to be hyper-focused on what they're trying to get done.
Exactly. And we met. I mean, you just can't believe how interesting people are who run businesses. And it's like their whole life. And if you call somebody up and say, hi, there's three of us, we're professors, and we want to come hear about your business. Some people are like, I don't have time for that. What are you kidding me? But actually, the vast majority of people are like, that sounds great. They love people. If you've built your own business, the three people want to come hear your story. That's very exciting. And for us, it was very exciting.
Tell me about one that sticks out. Someone that wow, this person has taught themselves an amazing set of principles without any formal training. Is that the kind of thing that happened?
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind. One of our very first visits was at a orthodontics practice in Johnsboro, Arkansas. Now, I don't recommend you go to
where the teeth are all beautiful, I presume.
I don't recommend you go to Johnsboro, Arkansas, especially not in July, because it was so hot. You can't even imagine. But that's neither here nor there. This guy had the most incredible. He was an orthodontist by training, and he had figured out a whole thing where there's a lot of orthodontists out there who kind of want to work part-time and don't want to do the business side of orthodontics. And so he built up he found local areas that were underserved, and he was sending orthodontists out sort of to work one day a week in those places. And then he'd done these other things to sort of build up the ability to do Medicaid-based orthodontics, which you kind of need much bigger scale to be bothered with because
of the paperwork and the federal bureaucracy.
And just the way he'd sort of put this all together and built a practice out of that historically had been very mom and pop into a local, not a huge empire across the country, but kind of a local empire.
And you called him, as I recall, the Flying Orthodontist. So I take it that he flew around a lot?
So at some point, we were talking to his business manager. At some point, she said, yeah, and then on Tuesdays or whatever it was, they take the plane down to whatever. And literally, we're like, the plane?
And this was his own plane.
His own plane. He enjoyed flying on top of everything else. So one of his practices was a short plane ride away.
There was also a crime scene business.
Oh, that was fantastic.
We're going to close with the crime scene.
So there's this environmental business. These guys go in and they clean up stuff. And yeah, you need this, right? And so one thing that he did was the local police would call him and say, we just found a meth lab. We don't know what to do with it. And he would go in and shut down meth labs by clean them up and make sure they didn't blow up and there was no environmental leaks.
So you have to be careful. So they would take their evidence, put their little plastic bags filled with evidence, but then they have this mess to deal with.
Exactly. I mean, they could blow up.
And he saw a business opportunity.
They could blow up. I'm basing this on one episode of CSI. So.
Yes, I think I've seen that episode.
So it must be true. Right? Anyway, yeah, this was his job. Make sure that stuff got safely put away where it wouldn't hurt anybody either by blowing up or leaking or what have you. And again, just that what he did technically was interesting for us, but what he did from a business perspective and thinking about how he put up sort of barriers to entry and other things that really fit with the practices of MBA teaching Just fantastic.
He became the go-to guy for meth lab deconstruction. Well, thank you for listening to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. If you missed any of this episode, listen anytime on demand with the SiriusXM app.